Hey, I'm Andy. Welcome to the church basement. Quick recap on emotions. Emotions are signals we sense and feel. They give us information about what we perceive is going on in us and around us. We respond to emotions by feeling them, investigating them, and then acting on them. That's all really straightforward in theory, but in practice, not so much. One of the reasons, which we covered in the video Emotions and the Brain, is because sometimes the feelings are too much or too intense and our brains kick in, trying to basically help us, and we end up in a fight or flight or a freeze mode. You could think of it sort of like a reflex. You touch something hot, that pain signal travels up your arm towards your brain, but before it even gets there, your nervous system has already told your hand to let go, to back away. It's reflexive. Intense emotions can feel a lot like this. The feeling is too much to handle, and our brain's reflexes kick in, and you react without really thinking. We did a deep dive on all this, and I don't really want to rehash it, so go watch the video, but I do want to focus on this concept called the window of tolerance. Window of tolerance! Personally, I think it's a fantastic picture that helps give me a better understanding of what's going on when my emotions hit a certain level of intensity. And regardless of what you think of interpersonal neurobiology, because we all have opinions about that, am I right? The window of tolerance sure seems to capture what many people, including myself, experience and how we can think through dealing with emotions in more helpful ways. Quick reminder, emotions, when they're really intense or overwhelming, can trigger our brains to switch into a hyper-arousal state, think fight or flight, or into a state of hypo-arousal, where things shut down, think freeze. We can think of hypo and hyper as the extremes of what we feel, and that leaves this middle space. This is where emotions and feelings we experience are tolerable, meaning whatever we're feeling is at a level of intensity where it's not too much for us, and we can think and we can process what's going on. Here, our brains don't throw us into a survival mode. It doesn't mean we're guaranteed to react in all the right ways, but when we're in our window of tolerance, we're much more likely to respond in good, right, healthy ways. When our feelings are within our window of tolerance, we're able to feel, think, investigate, look at what we're feeling, and then make decisions about how we want to respond. That's all great, but what do we do with all this? There are two ideas I think are helpful related to the window of tolerance. First, we can't necessarily control our emotions, meaning we can't consciously choose to feel a certain way or not feel a certain way, but we can regulate our emotions. Second, while we didn't choose to have the level of tolerance or the survival skills that we have, we can practice and learn to tolerate intense emotions, and we can widen our window of tolerance through connection. First, regulating emotions. We can't control emotions. We can only regulate them. If you ever hear someone talking about controlling their emotions, I think that's misleading. We can't control them, not directly, but we can affect them and influence them by changing other things we do have control over. Let me give you an example using something else we don't have control over, our heartbeat. Depending on what you're doing, how fit you are, how old you are, all sorts of factors, your heart rate could be anywhere from somewhere in the 40s up to 200 beats per minute. We can measure this by using one of these guys. This is a heart rate monitor. I can put this around my chest, and it tells my watch what my heart rate is, how often it beats per minute. When I got into running, I started using one of these to help me train and get the most out of my workouts. Early on, when I was just starting to run, I learned that there are ranges or zones, and if your heart rate is in that zone, you'll be able to get the most bang for your buck aerobically and really make your heart strong and healthy. For me, that's about 130 to 150 beats per minute. There's a lot of benefit when my heart is within that range. Anything under that zone, and it's maybe not enough stress. Anything over, and it's maybe too much stress. Too low, too high, right in the middle, 130 to 150. Does this picture sound familiar? It should. It's very similar to the window of tolerance and emotions. The thing about heart rate is you can't just will your heart rate and choose what your heart rate should be. Okay, heart, 145 beats per minute. 72. You can't decide in your mind, and you can't consciously send a signal to your heart. Faster! Slow down. It doesn't work. But you know what you can do? You can do burpees. You can run faster. You can run up a hill. These are all things that will increase your heart rate. And if you need to lower your heart rate, you can slow your pace down. If it's really hot out and you're sweating a lot, you can drink more water. You can take walk breaks. By adjusting what you're doing, by working harder or working easier, you can get your heart rate into the range you want. This is an example of regulation. You can't control your heart rate directly, but you can control it indirectly by changing things you have control over: your effort, your pace, your intensity. I like to think of emotions in the window of tolerance similar to how I think of heart rate. Why? Because just like we can't tell our heart to beat at a certain rate, we can't tell ourselves to feel a certain way. We can't control our emotions, not directly, but we can influence them indirectly, which is what regulation is all about. We do this by focusing on things we do have control over, by making choices and decisions about our attention and our actions. When we regulate our emotions, we do certain things that influence how we feel, and we bring those feelings down to a level of intensity where we can start to make wise, healthy decisions and figure out how we're going to respond to whatever's going on. Here are a few examples to sort of paint a picture of what regulation looks like. Let's start with being in a state of hypo-arousal, which is being frozen, freezing up, stuck. Intense feelings like shame, sadness, rejection, depression, loneliness, fear, worry, almost anything uncomfortable can overwhelm us and we can just freeze up. If you're like me, you could probably think of a scenario or a situation where you've just been stuck. You have no idea what to do, and doing anything seemed like it was just too much to handle. The danger with being frozen is that when we feel an emotion, what we need to do is respond and process what's going on. And when we feel stuck, we don't really want to do anything, and so we probably won't process and we won't respond. Instead, we'll tend to numb and distract ourselves, and in the short term, that might not seem all that bad, but in the long term, when it becomes our go-to strategy, it can really hurt us, and it leaves us with a lot of undealt with stuff. So what should we do if we find ourselves stuck and frozen? Before we can respond, we need to get unstuck and regulate these crippling feelings to a point where we can actually think things through. When I freeze up, I've found that action is one of the most effective ways at unfreezing me, moving out of this hypo state and back into a normal state within my window of tolerance. Simple tasks that can be completed, like doing the dishes, folding and putting away laundry, cleaning up my desk in my work area, which is always a disaster and you can't see, thankfully. There's a sense of taking control when we do these things. So when we're stuck, we can feel hopeless and helpless. So any small thing we can do to remind ourselves that we have power to change our current situation can help get us unstuck and out of this hypo-arousal state. By changing things around us through simple tasks, we can regulate these intense emotions down to a level where we can feel, think, and respond. On the other side of the spectrum is hyper-arousal, or fight or flight. Intense feelings of anger, shame, and fear can overwhelm us, and we can find ourselves freaking out. This is the opposite side of the spectrum, where our brains sort of push us to act, to fight, to push back, to run, to do something in the moment. The danger here is that the response is not thought out, and the stronger the emotion, the stronger the response. So almost anything could come out of us, which isn't ever good. When I'm freaking out, I have found that space and distance is what I need so I can calm down and regulate these emotions. So any activity that doesn't get me all worked up, but allows me space so I can calm down. Taking a walk, leaving the room, leaving a conversation. For me, once I'm at like a 7 or 8 in anger, I need space because nothing good is going to happen. It's only going to escalate. Space stops the progression. Space allows us to get away from whatever might be triggering us. Space limits the damage. I take a lot of walks. How long do you walk for? How long do you need to get away for? As long as it takes so you can calm down, gain perspective, and start to see things clearly. These are the actions we take. When we're frozen, we regulate how we feel by moving, by doing tasks, by changing the environment around us because we feel hopeless and helpless. When we're freaking out, we regulate by getting space and distance so that we can calm down and gain perspective. Here's the deal. We do have control over whether we do these things or not. We can't control how we feel, but we can control what we do. And what we do can change how we feel. This is regulation. Another piece of this is attention. What's difficult is that you can't necessarily leave a room, walk away from a conversation, get out of your house, and leave your thoughts behind. They come with you no matter what. We do have control over what we pay attention to, what we dwell on, what we think about, what we focus on, what we obsess about. Here's the deal. Our thoughts absolutely fuel our emotions, especially when they're heightened. So in these scenarios, it's best to do anything that will help shift our attention away from whatever is bothering us. Once you have space, you're more able to shift your attention. Again, tasks require attention. Things like listening to music, podcasts, audiobooks, reading, maybe exercise, even focusing on your breathing can give the mind the space it needs so that it can eventually start thinking through and processing what you're going through. Remember, part of our brain has kicked on because of the situation. So focusing on something else will actually allow our brains to kind of get back to a normal state and enable us to think things through rationally. But don't underestimate how hard paying attention to something else can be. Sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes we need help, which is when we lean on others. When I'm really angry, calling someone in my support network is all it takes for me to start to gain perspective and calm down. Whether we're freaking out or we're frozen, connecting to others is extremely helpful. And this brings us to our second idea, which is widening the window of tolerance. Here's the deal. Everyone is different, but things like trauma, abuse, neglect, abandonment, other childhood adversity has a big impact on our ability to tolerate intense emotions. We're left wounded and we're left without the skills to know how to handle life. Processing and working through old wounds helps us heal, and healing helps us tolerate things we wouldn't have been able to in the past. Whenever I talk to someone who has childhood trauma or family of origin stuff, I always ask if they've talked to a counselor. This stuff is really messy, and a professional can help us acknowledge it, make sense of it, and heal from it. There's nothing wrong with needing help, and there's nothing wrong with talking to a counselor. Also, a lot of us can't tolerate emotions because we never learned how to calm ourselves down or get ourselves unstuck. We just don't have the skills. Learning to feel and deal with emotions is passed on and modeled through relationships. We're born into a world unable to handle life. Learning how to feel and deal with emotions is passed on and modeled to us through relationships. We're born into the world unable to handle how we feel. If no one helps us develop the ability, meaning our brains don't develop the necessary pathways and we don't learn the skills, we will have a low tolerance until something changes. What needs to change? The types of relationships we have. If we didn't experience emotional intimacy as children, we need to experience it as adults. The good news is if we experience emotional intimacy with others, our brains can change and our tolerance will as well. I call this telling someone what it's like to be me. When we're experiencing something and we tell someone what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what we're believing, what we're going through, we're telling them what it's like in that moment to be me. That's a risky, vulnerable thing. But when we do that with the right people, with safe people, the response that we get from them is grace, compassion, empathy, understanding, and love. Dan Siegel calls this feeling felt. That experience of us literally being around someone who doesn't reject us, doesn't condemn us, doesn't tell us to get our stuff together, get over it, shut us down. When we experience that, it literally changes us. This is what helps us develop tolerance. We express our emotions to others, we experience grace, and our brains actually sense that we're safe. And when there's this sense of safety around others, we tend to not slip into these survival instincts to fight, flight, or freeze mode. And when we do this enough, we develop more tolerance. This is referred to as attunement, and because I'm not an expert and I don't want to take the time to explain it, I linked a podcast in the description that you can go check out. It's all really interesting stuff. Long story short, letting other people know who you are, what it's like to be you, connecting on an emotionally intimate level with others, it'll widen your window of tolerance, which ultimately enables you to feel and deal with a wider range of emotions. And then when we do start to freak out or freeze up, we use whatever tools we have and we regulate back to a level where we can start working through things. I've personally found this concept of the window of tolerance really helpful to think through my reactions and help me brainstorm things I can do when I am frozen or I'm starting to freak out. And if this is all completely new to you, you're probably going to want to spend some time working through all these ideas, and I recommend you do it with other people. Try answering these types of questions and sharing it with someone you trust. What emotions tend to overwhelm you? What are the warning signs that you are becoming overwhelmed? What activities calm you down when you're freaking out? What actions help you take control when you're frozen? Who can you talk to regularly about what it's like to be you? That's all for this video on the window of tolerance and regulating emotions. If you made it this far, I'm proud of you. If you like the video, literally like it, go subscribe to the channel. You won't miss any videos. And if you wouldn't mind, share this video with others, people who you think would benefit. My mission is to create resources that help people live more faithfully. And by sharing these videos, it would be a big help. Thanks.